Perfect. Perfect. So we're recording now. Thanks, Heidi, for making the time. As I said, be easier just to hit record because whatever we speak about, naturally, other people I feel can benefit, including us. Upon reflection, just looking back at some of the stuff that we talk about, um, a lot of it is really valuable, and like we said, a lot of it comes out in the moment as well. So I was like, why don't we just hit record and just turn it into something because we're going to speak anyway. And for people who are listening, me and Heidi met a few years ago because I did something called One Last Talk, and she was kind enough to take me through that process. So thanks for being here, Heidi.
Thanks for having me. I love your confidence that just gold is going to spill out when we speak. But I really do agree. One of the things I've been excited about having this call with you is just having the space to actually have a real conversation. I think so often it's just busy, busy, go, go, go. And when you're actually in these environments, when you're having a conversation, but also it's being recorded, it just adds an extra little element of something, doesn't it? And I think often you can surprise yourself at what comes out in those moments. So
yeah, a lot of it in the moment, it just I find when I'm having conversations with people, generally a lot of it when we're in kind of the flow state and you're not overthinking stuff, it just comes out, especially if you're speaking to the right type of person, having the right type of conversation, you really
yeah,
kind of come into alignment naturally, and then that's where the gold, if you want to call it that, kind of comes out, all the inner wisdom that we all have.
yeah, I completely agree. And I will say right up front, I think you're an excellent space holder. So it's lovely
I
to be in your
appreciate that. I appreciate that. Thank you. And likewise, just to give everyone context, whoever's listening or watching right now, the last 6 months, me and Heidi were both on the same group coaching call, kind of working on our craft to be better coaches, to hold space for people and to bring them into alignment. But I guess the journey started much before that for both of us. And what we haven't really spoke about, because I haven't had a chance to ask you this question, I was thinking about it earlier today, how you actually got into the realm of like thinking about this is the kind of stuff you want to do, or emotional intelligence and bringing people into alignment and that kind of stuff. I know you were kind of in the space of the chiropractic world before, but like it'd be good to hear that kind of background.
Yeah. So how I went from chiropractic to coaching, do you think?
Even before that, because I'm sure you were thinking about it whilst you're still a chiropractor, right? Like that was still in the forefront of your mind in terms of the way you approach clients and stuff. So I'm like, where did that kind of come into your life where you thought, you know what, this is actually something I want to work on and give more attention to?
Yeah, so I will start sharing, but pepper me with questions as we go. I have been a chiropractor for 15 years, and in the chiropractic space, we are so exposed to personal development. There's the option, and I went to a gazillion seminars because I felt so lacking in self-worth, and I was like, I've got to go to everything and learn everything, like I'm going to find the answer. So God, I went to, I don't know, 10 seminars a year. Like I went to so much stuff. So some of that is business stuff, but a lot of that was personal development stuff. So I think I was just gently exposed over the years, but none of it really made a difference. I was going very much with that attitude of, there's something broken inside of me. I need the answer. I need to be fixed. And of course, nothing ever managed to do that. So I was being exposed to all of these concepts, but not really letting anything like really deeply sink in and shift me. And it wasn't until I went to Brave Soul, which I know you then did the year after, with Philip McKernan, that having that week-long retreat of doing, I think, just the work wasn't even necessarily that different to what I'd been exposed to before, but it just landed so much more deeply, and it broke me open in the most beautiful way. And I remember in probably the last couple of days on that retreat just feeling so comfortable in my own skin and so joyful and happy in a way that I I hadn't done since I was a little kid that I can remember. Like, I just felt so free. And the thought of going from that to regular life again just felt heavy and crushing. So I remember on that last day, sort of just as the retreat was being closed up, I was like, I think I want to sell my business and do something else. Like, and it was like, all right, pipe down, lady, like, go home. And so I had that thought that I wanted something to change, but I really didn't know what it was. I really didn't know. And I think for a long time already, I'd been on that, like, what's my purpose? What am I really here for? You know, those sorts of questions. And had never really come up with anything really. And I, to be honest, I just used it as an excuse to beat myself up that I hadn't figured it out yet. And how come everyone else knows and I don't? And it was probably another, I don't know, six months, 9 months after Brave Soul that I was listening to a podcast, and I heard the sentence again from Philip saying that your greatest gift sits right next to your deepest wound. It was something like that. And I was like, oh, well, I know all about my wounds. So if I get clearer on those, maybe my gift I'll figure out what my gift is from there. And as I was like journaling around what I felt my wounds were, it became so obvious to me, you know, in a moment, that coaching and helping people in that way was what I felt I was being really guided to do. And I think as I then lent into the idea of that a little bit more, I realized that in a way that's what I've always been doing. I just never realized it. But yeah, certainly I realized in my chiropractic business, I had this beautiful business in many ways, in that I had, you know, I saw very few new clients. My books were filled with people that just came on repeat. And I could never really figure out how I'd managed to do that. And as I leaned more into what maybe my gifts are and my things around coaching, I thought, I think what they're coming for is the space I managed to hold for them, of just, I think I was just able to hold a vision for them of what they could be and what their life could be that maybe they weren't getting anywhere else.
So it's more than just adjustments, basically. Those your sessions with individuals, it sounds like.
It was I mean, the adjustments are magical, but I think looking back, and of course, when you look back, you can look with rose-tinted glasses and start to be kinder to yourself. But now when I think back, I almost think my adjustments were this kind of like almost spiritual kind of experience of, you know, there was very little talking, but when you're in that space and people are turning up expecting that and expecting to feel better and to be heard and seen, and there's something magical about having your hands on someone as well, and I do miss that, you know, that in that silence with your hands on someone, with that vision and the intention you're holding for someone, can be really beautiful.
It's testament to what you do and your skill. Just that alone, holding those sessions. I don't know if you put as much value on it as I'm seeing for you right now, because I went to osteopath for the first time this year, and he's osteopath slash life coach as well. And it was referred to me, and I could just tell, like soon as I entered the space, it was in his home, and he'd created this beautiful space to practice privately. It was just the energy immediately was like, there's something about this space. He's really created a sacred space here. And then a lot of it was just really deep conversation before we actually got to the work part, which is the shortest part of the session, funnily enough. And it's
moment, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, one of my questions to him was like, do you ever get scared? Like, he just sounds so confident and so tapped in, and like meditates, grounded, voracious reader, this, that, the other. I'm like, when I get my neck adjusted and stuff, it feels amazing. But I'm like, I can never imagine doing that. It's like scary. What if something goes wrong? And he was like, I'm scared all the time. But the thing is, he kind of gets out of the way by grounding himself and allowing, I guess, in a more of a spiritual sense, the universe to flow through him. And he's like, anyone who comes through my door is there for a reason. I'm there to help them. I trust in my ability and I just let it happen. I don't, if you get your mind involved too much and you overthink it, things start to go wrong. But if you just allow it to flow, believe in your ability and just happens, I'm like, okay, if that's whatever you're doing, it's working. So just continue doing that, because it feels really good. But it's more than just adjustments, because you have to see how the mind, body, and soul connect as a whole. So how, like, from the many people that you've seen, like, I guess what I'm curious about is like what you feel the, not the issue, but like the main concern or the main thought that was coming up with people each time they visited you. Did you see like a theme? Of course, it shows up in their body in different ways, but like emotionally, I'm sure there's some grounding behind what was going on with them.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's very different what people consciously felt was showing up versus what I more energetically and through their body could feel what was going on. And actually probably one of my frustrations with chiropractic, I think in the end why I ended up leaving and going into coaching, is because I think I'm so sensitive to people's energies. When they're coming in, you're like, yeah, great, how are you doing? They're like, yeah, everything's great. And just energetically, I'm like, well, I know that's not true. I found that so draining. And really what I could feel in their bodies was just an overload of stress, of living a life out of alignment, out of integrity in some way, and not in necessarily some huge big thing, but just those little decisions, the little bits that we make that aren't true to us. All of that toxicity ultimately is what it turns into, just then sits in the body. And so that is consistently what I felt with people. And I could feel a real difference if I was working. I had some clients who were nutritionists or who were energy workers or who had done a ton of personal development work on themselves. And it was amazing when I was working with those people, how, you know, you do one adjustment and their whole body changes. Whereas if someone isn't taking care of themselves physically, mentally, emotionally, you do an adjustment and it's like the body goes, oh, like there's this tiny little shift versus just like everything unwinding. So yeah, it was really interesting seeing the dramatic difference in people's ability to be able to heal. And that seemed very much based on, yeah, how they took care of themselves.
Did you ever get adjusted yourself? And like, what was that process like for you?
Did
Like,
I ever
what
get
was
adjusted
the mirror,
myself?
yeah, the mirror
So
reflection of what was going on in your body and the thoughts that you had, seeing what happens in your clients versus, oh, right, this is what's going on with me.
yeah, so I get adjusted pretty much every single week and have done for the last 10 years or so.
I
So
literally wish that my osteopath was my neighbor. I'm like, I could, once I went to one session, I was like, I need to come see you every single week.
yeah, it's I wouldn't be without it. So yeah, so I like to think that because I get so regularly adjusted and do a lot to take care of my nutrition and physical health and all those other things as well. I like to think, I don't know how true this is, that I was enough of a sort of empty vessel that my experiences weren't showing up then through my clients. But what I definitely notice is that when I'm under more stress, when I go to get adjusted, you know, I don't say anything to my chiropractor, but they just will feel me and go like, oh, what's been going on with you? And I'm like, oh, can you feel that? And, you know, I haven't physically felt it, but they'll feel through my spine and suddenly there's a load more tension in my system. So yeah, you can't get away with anything because it just shows up in the body.
Yeah, it gets trapped. It's a reflection. The body's a reflection of the mental and emotional state that we carry. And it was interesting because when I went for my first adjustment, I thought, yeah, just go once and I'll be sorted. I don't have to go back. But what happened was basically it just began to unwrap everything that happened probably over the last 2-3 decades. I'm like, oh, that was just the beginning. Now we're like unwrapping this present and to keep going
Yeah.
back. And then I feel I could feel, being sensitive to my own energy in my own body. I could feel like, oh, now there's more tension there, and then now it's like shifted to this place and that place. Now my knee, and like that was never a problem before. And so it's like it's
Yeah.
all just piling on. And then once you remove one layer, and you're open enough, and you're um, I guess an empty vessel, like you said, it's easier for it to cascade down further and further. And the healing process is just a lot faster because you're allowing it to happen. You're in the space of alignment. So I welcome it, but it's interesting how much you learn about yourself in that time.
Yeah, it's and I just love hearing you say like, and then this bit started hurting, and then suddenly it was my knee, and I've never had a problem with my knee. And you can imagine if someone isn't aware of what's happening, they're like, I never had a problem with my knee, and now it hurts. This is awful. Whereas if you're aware of the peeling the layers of the onion, it's like amazing. We're uncovering something else that has probably been there for years, and I didn't know, and now we're
Exactly.
healing
Exactly.
it.
Because
And
everything's
it,
connected, the whole body is connected. So if one thing shifts, everything else is going to shift in alignment with that. And until you feel like you're grounded, it's just going to keep bouncing around to different parts of the body until you get to the root cause. For me,
yeah,
where most of the tension has shown up, according to my osteopath, and also from where I feel it all, is in my pelvis. It's an interesting area.
mm,
Creativity, playfulness, sexual energy. So much is just like stored in that part of our body. And the conversations that come up as a result of like him feeling, oh, we keep seeing a repeat theme that we keep having to work on this part of the body. And it took a while, and the last session was very intense. Wow, I just felt really drained coming away from it. Next day I slept probably 11 hours straight, and then it was
oh,
hurting the next day because he did a bit of a massage, but then pain completely dissipated. But that was because I'd already seen him 5 times, and then we got to the point where he could go that deep the sixth time, and then it almost felt like a breakthrough. But I definitely see the benefit in going regularly, because whatever's going on day to day in your life, it's reflecting in the body, and unless you get it balanced, it's just going to keep piling on again.
yeah, that's really fascinating. And with that sort of the pelvis area showing up over and over, did you just have a breakthrough, do you think, in the adjustments that were done, or did you also shift something in your life or in your psyche as well,
It
do
was
you
in this. It
think?
was in the psyche as well, because he was asking me
Yeah.
certain questions, and then as soon as I answered it, something would pop, and he's like, "It's funny when you gave me that answer at the same time. Did you hear what just happened?" And so he's connecting the dots, and I was just like felt like laughing and crying at the same time. That's what was happening. And every time he adjusted like a certain part of the body, either I think it was either the neck or um, the lower spine, which is where I had a lot of the pain up to now. I just couldn't help but laugh. It was just like trapped joy was basically what was happening, and it was just coming out. And I was just laughing like an idiot on my own. And he knew what was happening, so he wasn't saying anything. And the funny thing is, the same thing happened in Brave Souls. So similar to what you said, I think you went in 2018, was it?
2017.
Oh, 2017. So I went in 2019, and I remember when we went on that long walk through the green fields, that was when like one of the major shifts happened for me. And everyone was kind of like everyone had their like kind of music plugged in, and earphones plugged in, reflecting, some people crying and just looking a bit serious and looking out into the distance. And I was like, why is this not happening for me? Like what's going on? So I was like, let me just listen to the music, just get out of my head. And then I just started laughing uncontrollably, and I was like, what is happening right now? Like everyone looks so sad and I'm laughing. And then we stopped halfway through, and Philip was like, oh, does anyone want to share? And I was like, yeah, me, I want to share. This is kind of weird, but I think I know what's going on. And I said, like, up to now, and this was probably a few days in at this point, I was like, up to now, I was looking for the part that was going to make me cry or kind of make me break open, if you will. And the way that everyone was breaking open typically was crying. So I was like, well, where's my tears? I don't know. Like, I'm not really sad about anything. Why not? Is something wrong with me? Um, and then I felt lighter in that moment after I started laughing. And I was like, what I realized was my breakthrough wasn't crying. It was having so much suppressed joy that I had to laugh to allow it to kind of open the floodgates. And I'd suppressed it over time for various reasons. And it was something that just needed to click for me to just laugh and basically give it a safe vessel to come out, and it did. And then that whole week, rest of the week, I was just smiling constantly, even though there was some ups and downs, but overall I felt a lot lighter in myself. And like you, on the last day, I was like, I don't want to go home, I don't want my phone back, I don't want to get back onto this coach, I'd rather just stay here.
Yeah,
But
I
it's
love that. And do you think that that laughter, that joy, that playfulness, to some level, has that been a really fundamental shift in the way that you now show up in the world?
yeah, definitely. There's some lightness around my just day-to-day approach to life. There's some lightness compared to before, where it was really dark and heavy, and it still happens from time to time, but I anchor myself in that moment and in that shift that happened, where I realized that's kind of how I always was. And then obviously as a child, joy kind of comes a lot more naturally to you. When you look at children, you can't help but smile. But then over time, as we grow up, life happens, and the way in which we deal with it is kind of influenced by parents or friends or society. And then we're like, oh, let's pack it away because we're not allowed to talk about this, or don't have time to express or to experience this emotion. Just get on with the exams, get on with this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
So having that release was like, oh, this is like a new level of awareness, or a new level of kind of exploration, if you will. And then since that point, I guess I was just going deeper and deeper into my own emotional intelligence and understanding where I'm at and what's been going on. What have I suppressed? What have I not addressed? What am I not seeing? And it's funny because the more I did that, the deeper I was able to connect with other people and connect the dots that they may not be able to see, because I've done it in myself. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting.
I love that. So it makes me think, a year after Brave Soul, I went on a trip to India, and I knew that we weren't going to be doing as much personal development. Like, I knew it was going to be different. This trip was called Brave Adventure. Like, I knew we were going to be doing some really cool stuff. And I remember thinking, probably about halfway through, it's a 10-day trip, about halfway through, I was actually getting anxious, because I was like, I'm having the best fucking time of my life, but we haven't been doing the work. When are we going to sit down and do the work? Like, what's going on? Like, Urgh. And I just caught myself, and I was like, hang on a minute. You've never laughed this much in your life. You've probably never had this much fun. Maybe that is the work. It just looks different to what I expected. And that, same as you, but it obviously took me much longer to get the lesson than you got it much quicker than me. But just that, like, oh,
but that's yeah, it's funny you say that, because it's this conditioning that you have to suffer to feel like you're progressing, or to feel like you're working on something. It's such a big shift to then feel like it can be light if you're in flow and you're in alignment. That's also work. Well, it's not even work, it's called play, but we don't associate that with progression. We associate that with being lazy, or laying back, or taking time off. And it's like, that's not time off. That's how it should be all the time.
Yeah. 100%. And I definitely default often into getting over serious. That I still get pulled back there a lot, but I'm able to catch it now and just go, what am I doing? Like, this isn't very serious. This doesn't matter that much. And just noticing it now, I can often, normally I like put some really loud music on and dance around the house and just do something to like change. And then I'm giggling at how stupid I look, or, whatever it is. And it just shifts it so much quicker now.
Yeah. I think it's just a journey, right? Like, you just have to be gentle with yourself and realize it doesn't matter how many times you slip back, as long as you're moving forward and you're continuously coming back to a point of awareness, then what else is there to do? That's it. That's the whole game, is just being aware. Like, yeah. I don't think there's really a destination to get to. It's just how can I have more fun along the way? And I was actually considering going to Brave Adventure last year, way at the beginning of last year, when we were planning to go. Yeah. And obviously it didn't happen, but just a brief description of what it was going to be about, that was my initial thought as well. I was like, well, what's the difference between that and a holiday then? I don't get it. Like, I'm paying to do some personal development. But then, like you said, it's like, that's it. Like, you just remember to have fun again. And what bigger lesson is there than that? So, but I commend you actually for doing that, doing Brave Soul, One Last Talk, taking us through it. Um, and one last talk, just to give context to people who like are not aware of what that is. Just almost a process to figure out what an what your truth is in that moment. And if you were to be on the planet for the very last day, what would you share with people? And it couldn't really be a lecture or a kind of personal development presentation. It's more about your inner truth. And usually it comes down to coming to terms with your emotions, things you've suppressed, things you feel strongly about but haven't really shared. And one thing that I was thinking about today, actually, that I really um it's testament to you, actually. So when we're at your house practicing, and I didn't notice this at the time, I'd written everything out by then, and I read it out. I think I was the first one to stand up and read it, and you were like, in the nicest way possible, you sound angry. You can't be angry. And I was like, do I? And then I realized, I was like, oh, shit, there's that much anger that it's coming across as me telling everyone off or telling off whoever I was talking about. And I was like, oh, wow, that's, and then it picked, like, Philip picked that up as well a few weeks later when I went to Brave Soul. He was like, I just think there's a lot of anger in you, because I was quite quiet the first few days. And he was right. Yeah, I was just pissed off about everything. Like you said, my purpose. Why is everyone else progressing and I'm not? Everything seems like it's not working in my favor, and whatever it is, this, that, and the other. And my health was a big one as well, like my self image and self confidence, plus where I was going in life, and then my relationship with my parents, and so many things happening parallel side by side. But the default emotion was anger, just angry at stuff, angry at life. And it's just, you end up becoming serious because of everything happening, and you're not processing it, or you don't have the space or the awareness to process it. And yeah, it just ended up me becoming this very serious person. And like you, I kind of default back to that from time to time, but I'm a lot more aware of it now. So um but I just feel like over these last few years, as I've dipped into this more and more, um as I mentioned before, like, I'm able to see that in other people and kind of ask the questions in terms of what's driving the current behavior, because obviously there's some kind of foundation there that's been built in the past and they're not aware of it. And so, like, a few conversations I had with friends and family, they were like, well, what do you mean? The past is done. Like, that doesn't play a role in today. I'm like, of course it does. Like, who you are right now is based on what's happened before. I'm like, well, no, I've forgotten about that. Like, we're just focusing on today. Today's a new day. Like, you're reborn every day, all that kind of stuff. I'm like, no, that doesn't. Maybe at some point that made sense to me, but and now it's like building blocks. Every single day you've lived up to this point is a building block. So you are who you are based on the last 3,000 days you've lived, or whatever it is, and what's happened has shaped you. So it's interesting that this field of work allows us, or gives us, the privilege to kind of dive into that story or that past experience, to understand what the hell was going on. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and I know you've just
And
shifted into that. It's like 6 months ago, right? Into that space
yeah, and
now.
I think, I mean, you've said that so beautifully there, that it gives us the privilege to, like, look at that aspect of someone's life. I think that's, yeah, that's so beautifully said, and that's such a beautiful intention, because I do think when we start digging around in our own past, but also in other people's past, like, it's difficult territory, isn't it? There's so much stuff from our past that we haven't been aware of, or that we're very aware of and we're suppressing. It's just full of these, like, bombs waiting to go off, I think, is how it can feel to someone. And yeah, I do think we need to take that very carefully and sacredly as we start to delve into that area with people. But just as you say, or just as you alluded to, like, I feel that's the fundamental work that you do, that I do, sort of in this coaching space, is to really help people uncover what went on in their past, what has shaped them, what their story is. And as we get clarity on that, you can really start to connect the dots going forwards of why your present is the way it is. Like, we're not just digging around there because it's fun and interesting. It, as you say, completely shapes your present, and therefore is going to shape everything in your future as well. And I was going to say, until you've really done the work around it. I'm not sure if that's true. I think to some extent it's always going to shape your present and your future, but less and less so, and with more and more awareness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. So you become conscious at some point of what's happening. So you can start to take not control, but you can start to be more aware of the direction in which your life's going. And so you can make different decisions because you're like, oh, I'm not going to choose to do that anymore and engage in that pattern because it's coming from there. And that doesn't make sense anymore because that's not happening to me anymore. Forgive, heal, whatever it is. And then you can move past it and you can make a fresh decision from a more confident and clear place. And your life, as a result, may take a different direction at that point because you're not doing the same thing over and over again and hoping for something different to happen. So, was that like, are there any emotions that you battled with in your own process? And I'm saying this in a nice way. I'm not, the other way I could say is, what are you struggling with? Because definitely, even though we're talking about this, yeah, no, I mean, as even though we're kind of, this is where our gift is to help other people. Naturally, we're humans as well. Right now, we just have the courage to do it for ourselves enough so we can show up better for other people as well, which is difficult to do. But I'm interested to hear more about your story around that.
Yeah, I mean, I had a huge amounts that I've had to work through and continue to work through. Do you want me to share like a little bit about what that
start wherever you feel
was,
or whatever you want to, whatever you feel called to share right now?
Whatever. Okay, so I think when I even sort of started to learn about this concept that our past affects our present, you know, now I just think it's so obvious, but there was absolutely a time when I had never even considered that. And if I did think about it, I was like, well, I had a great childhood. There was nothing in there to shape me in a way, I think, is how I felt about it. And of course that ended up not being the case at all. But I think this happens, and actually I see this with I work with a lot of chiropractors and people in that sort of healing space. And I think certainly the ones who are attracted to me tend to be on that more highly sensitive, maybe even empath sort of space. And I think when you're in that sort of highly sensitive space, not a big trauma has to happen for it to have been deeply traumatizing for you. You know, I would think, well, I wasn't raped, or there was nothing overtly awful that happened to me that I could say, yes, that's what's happened, and no wonder I am the way that I am. But because I was so sensitive to energies, the things that I have discovered really affected me was that I never really truly felt loved by my dad. So I had a real feeling that I wasn't loved by him. I felt very loved by my mum, but that love felt very conditional. So I felt like I already don't feel loved by my dad, so I better do everything I can so that my mum still loves me. So those are two things that I guess I've been working on and have healed to a pretty good level over the last 4 or 5 years, whatever it's been. And really, when I look at those things, even as I uncovered them, I was like, oh yeah, I can see that they've affected me, but probably not that much. And as I started to pick away more and more at them, I'm like, oh God, yeah, I never felt good enough. I lacked self-worth. As soon as a guy came along that I respected and I thought he was really cool and interesting, I was like, oh, well, I'm so uninteresting. Like, I can just shelter under his personality and wonderful. So I got married to someone that was hugely inappropriate for me, and just like locked onto him for dear life because I wasn't a good enough person. And all of these things started to, I started to see the dots of why all of those things had happened. So that it's affected everything. It's almost difficult to talk about it without like spending the next 3 hours in a sort of half therapy session with you. So I don't know if any of that
that's how these podcasts end up going. They end up becoming therapy sessions because we open up to everything. But it takes courage to just go that far into the story where you get down to the core of what it is. And like I was unraveling a few stories with a friend of mine last year, and he came down from Wolverhampton, spent the day together, and we were just talking about a few different situations that had come up in his life and my life, and then we kind of peeled back the layers each time, different scenarios, but every time it was, I'm not good enough. Basically just comes down to that. And it's like, where did that behavior come from, or that feeling come from? And it's usually derived from not having approval from the people that you'd hope for early on in your life. But just it takes a lot to even comprehend that that's what it is, because for most people you can't just be like, so how's your relationship with your parents? Do they love you enough? Like, what are you talking about? Like, why are we even talking about this? What's this got to do with anything? But it's, as you said, it then builds into like your decision making. Do you trust yourself enough? Well, no, I don't, because my parents said this, that, and the other when I decided to do this. So you're like, okay, you don't consciously tell yourself, I'm not good at making decisions. It's a subconscious thing where you're like, oh, better be hesitant, better think twice, better get someone else's approval first, better double check before I. So it shows up in every way. And it's interesting you mentioned about your marriage, because as you're talking about your dad, I was like, from a female's perspective, if you were going into a relationship and you had that issue with a I guess a father figure, it's just interesting to see how that would then play out. So I mean, like, how was that conversation with your ex-partner? Like, because I don't know how much he was involved in these sort of conversations and the emotional awareness as well. So
so actually with my ex-husband, not at all. I mean, we split up 10 years ago. So we split up before I had really gotten any awareness. And it's only now looking back at it that I'm like, oh, that's why I was with him. And that's why I behaved the way I did through that relationship. But it sort of imploded in a very dramatic way long before I'd gone into the personal development space. But it was, interestingly, it was definitely because I was so affected by the breakup of that, because he'd been my whole life for 10 years. We were together for 10 years. And when that fell apart, suddenly I'm back to like, oh, I'm back to being me again. This is awful. I don't want to be me. And as I started to get introduced to personal development, I think one of the first things that really struck me was this conversation about being responsible. And definitely in my breakup at the time, it's like, it's all his fault. Like, he's done everything wrong. I was a delight. It's all him. And then I learned this concept of, we create our own reality and responsibility. And I think then I flipped into suddenly being aware of all of the bits that I'd done, but rather than using that in a really healthy way of awareness and understanding, it turned into self-blame. Suddenly it was like, oh my God, like I was so awful because I, behaved in all of these ways. And it was then a slow, again, process of going from sort of blaming him to then blaming myself, to then just coming to a place of understanding and compassion for me and compassion for him to understand what happened. So that was interesting. And definitely with my dad, I remember when I'd always been vaguely aware of this sort of feeling of not feeling loved by him, but kind of it didn't really seem to affect me. And, I didn't really think much of it. And when it was brought to the surface, and, Philip, who it was this conversation at Brave Soul, really said, I think this is impacting everything in your life. And I was like, you're wrong. I just don't want
to believe it.
Believe it. And I was highly encouraged by Philip to go home and have a conversation with my dad about how I felt. And the idea of that was just so horrendous that within the space of a few minutes of that idea being floated, I was like, I'm not going to do that.
Anxiety overload.
But the reason why, because of course we're excellent at justifying our decisions to keep us in the right, I was like, yeah, I didn't feel loved because he didn't hug me and tell me he loved me, and that's what I wanted. But he drove me to the airport and came around and did DIY. And, he showed me love in all these other ways. So of course I know I'm loved, and I just need to reconcile myself with that and check that piece of personal development is done. And I really thought that I had just got some awareness, figured it out, done. And then it was 6 months later, I was at some other little retreat, and the conversation around parents and relationships with them came up. And I remember thinking, oh, the rest of the group, you are screwed. You're all going to be in tears in a moment, but I've already worked on this stuff. I'm fine. Yeah. And then, of course, minutes later, I was the one sobbing. And I thought, okay, this is affecting me maybe more than I realized. And that then very quickly after that, I had a conversation with my dad about it. And then it was another 3-4 months of really quite difficult times and healing that had to happen. But having that conversation and then doing the healing, I very quickly got to see, yes, this relationship with my dad, or my story about my relationship with my dad, has impacted everything in my life, everything. And I see with my clients now sometimes, because we do a lot of work around past, that sometimes, just like I was at the start, they are just unwilling to take the next step. They'll get the emotional awareness around it, but they won't let themselves feel it, and they won't let themselves have a conversation or write a letter or do whatever's needed to take that next step. And it does just mean that they're kind of stuck, and it breaks my heart, because I guess because I have experienced so deeply the shift that can happen when you're brave enough to lean into your past and really heal it. It can be so profound, but equally I understand just how terrifying it can be.
Yeah, it is one of the hardest things to do, to come to terms with and to actually face up to and then take action on. It's one thing thinking about it and be like, oh, I know the solution. Yeah, I should have that chat or write that letter. But actually doing it is like a whole different ballgame, because you're just opening up floodgates for a conversation that could go in a million different directions, because you don't know how that person's going to react. Because remember, they're not in the same position as you, having done months or years of work to get to the point where they're like, oh, writing a letter is what I need to do for the next part of my healing. But it's interesting, because I also think that whatever it is that you're trying to heal in a relationship, so let's say, for example, you're looking for, you're like I was, for example, angry with my dad, just to use me as an example, in terms of certain decisions he's made or certain conversations he's had with me or behaviors. Like, okay, well, if I have this conversation and he doesn't get it, what happens? Am I going to remain pissed off? Well, no, that means that I'm then relying on him for my healing. That doesn't make sense, because I'm taking the control out of me. So actually, you're doing the process of writing the letter or having the conversation is the healing itself. It doesn't matter what that person says, because you can't control their journey. This is for me to come to peace with it and to kind of break the or to not break, but heal the karmic relationship that's going on here. And then if they want to continue that behavior, fine. But at least I've healed the part that's kind of alarm bells every time I'm put in that kind of situation, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
It certainly makes perfect sense to me. And that's a really funny piece, I think, around my experience with my dad is we had the conversation and then, you know, nothing changed for a few months. And I was like, well, this is awful. You know, you're told don't go in with expectations. And of course, we intellectually know that. But again, of course, I had expectations. But then what happened with my dad after a few months of nothing, he completely changed and he started to show me love and tell me he loved me and he's proud of me. Like, he completely did a 180 and gave me everything I could ever have wanted from him from that sort of emotional standpoint. And what I was shocked to discover, which speaks so beautifully to your point, is that it didn't actually make me feel any different. It's not that I needed him to be different, it's that I had to do the healing. And I just hadn't quite done the healing yet. Like, the conversation was only the start of the healing. And I think it was actually a gift for me that I got to see him give me everything I could ever want and realize that doesn't fix it. Because if that had made me feel better, maybe I'm now just beholden to keep people pleasing him so that I keep getting the love in the way that I want. It, you know, it would have been awful actually if that had worked. But that wasn't the case. As you say, it is you doing the work, you going through that process.
Yeah, 100%. It's like a drug almost. You know, if a person is behaving a certain way to help you feel a certain way, and you become reliant on it, it's the issue, the attachment that you have to it. I mean, it's fine if they show you love and give you a hug and buy you a present every day. Cool, I'd welcome that. I want to receive all of that. I want to be showered with blessings and love. But if I get reliant on that to make my day, that's where the issue comes in. So it's really about just going, for me anyway, it's been about going through this process, which I'm still very much on, but realizing it all comes down to me, just how grounded I am and how I approach any conversation and the space that I create for that conversation, whether it's this, whether it's a stranger, whether it's my dad, my brother, that will naturally have an impact in the way that they show up and how much they open up. And if I'm coming very, like, I just had a conversation with both my parents actually last weekend, and it lasted multiple hours, and it was probably one of the best conversations we've had. But if I'd come to it with, you know what, I want to talk about this, you've made me angry about this is where I feel hurt. It's just that energy. It's just, they automatically will become defensive. And you can replace my parents with whoever in your own personal circumstance, right? Whoever you want to approach a conversation with, it just, the defensiveness goes up. But that's because how I'm showing up. And I think it takes a level of awareness to realize that actually it's not all their fault. It does take kind of responsibility and accountability, and takes courage to have that accountability, to realize I do have some level of control here and I need to figure out how to best maneuver this, and then see where it goes. And it was interesting. And it was interesting because we talked about so many different things, all the way back from my degree and the fact that I went to law school and then I left, and what that decision making was like, and then a series of decisions that I'd made up to that point, which were all pretty much my own, not according to their plan or what they'd probably hoped for as a son. And yet they've all worked out perfectly. And I'm like, so that whole conversation was essentially what I was alluding to, was how much do you trust me at this point now in my journey? So that whatever I choose to do next, we're not having this battle. So it was interesting because trust is like I didn't think that was going to be what the conversation was about, but essentially that's what it all boiled down to from a parent and child perspective. Like, how much do you trust where I've ended up in life and who I am as a person, and then where I choose to go next. It shouldn't feel like, which it did in the past, like a business opportunity where I'm pitching to persuade you that this is the best way. Trust me, I've done the work. I want to try and come across as smart as possible. These are all the pros and cons. I've weighed it. It's not about that. It's like, I shouldn't have to present a deck to you. I should be able to tell you, this is what I'm choosing to do in my life. This is the reason. And that's it. Whether it makes sense to you or not, it's about, I trust you enough to go off and do what you need to do. Anyway, I went on a rant there, but go on.
Yeah. No, well, it's so beautiful to hear it, because you, like, just energetically you can hear the difference, and even just the way like you were leaning forwards when it's like I want this outcome and I want them to think this, and it's so controlling, isn't it? And it's us going in trying to manipulate them to be a certain way. Like, of course that's going to be a disaster. But then when you start talking about just the way in this conversation, and I'm sure many before this, just like, this is who I am, and you're bold enough and brave enough to show up as you, not needing anything from them. And suddenly the conversation, all of you are different in that conversation, because you're just, this is who I am. You can be angry or happy about that, but this is who I am, and that's okay.
That energy becomes magnetic, I think. Like, I found that over time, the more you become self-confident, which is a byproduct of the healing and the work that you do, and you're like, what, this is who I am. Yeah, there's flaws, there's great things, there's not so great things, but it's just it's who I am, like, whatever. You become magnetic, because everyone subconsciously wants to have that feeling of peace within themselves and not having to battle about what's the right thing to do, how do other people see me, am I comfortable making this decision and showing up this way or not? And we're just interesting as humans. We have these mental and emotional battles with ourselves every day.
And without a doubt, that the ability to just show up more as yourself and have those brave, bold conversations, I think that's been one of the biggest things that I've noticed going on this sort of healing journey. It's one of the most freeing things that I've been able to do for myself, is just be more me.
Is there any particular instances that come to mind where you're like, what, I'm really proud of how I showed up in that moment, which is a testament to maybe the journey you've been on so far?
I think for me personally, it's been being able to be me, more of me around my family. So there hasn't necessarily been a specific, this happened, but every time I show up around my family, one of the pieces that I've been healing, I guess, more recently, is that right from a young age, I just didn't feel like I belonged with my family. I was just so different from them. And we always joke my surname is Brown, and it was always like, oh, Heidi, you're not a real Brown. And it wasn't said in a mean way. It was just like, you're just so different from us. And of course, when you're little, you really pick that up. And I just always felt it was my job at home to keep everyone happy. So even as an adult, I'd show up at home and just like be like meek and silent and hope they wouldn't notice that I was different from them and thought differently about things. And actually just showing up in those circumstances as more of me has been one of the most liberating things.
Wow. I love that. And I can see from like just the way you're speaking about it that you're a lot more content or happier with how things are unfolding there. And that's a big thing. I mean, one of the most uncomfortable places to be is around family, especially if you're on the path to figuring out who you are. Naturally, you're going to start to question things, unravel things that your family are doing, that society is doing, your place in that family. But especially if they're saying, like, you just mentioned about you're not a real Brown, like, while that on the surface it's like, oh yeah, it's just a joke, whatever, but that's basically reinforcing the story that you're not one of us. So you're just like, I'll either overachieve and prove to you I'm better than you, or just don't talk about me, I'll just stay in the background, I hope you don't call me out. It's like it goes one of two ways, and I think I took the latter, like you, and I ended up just wanting to be the person that doesn't really get called on too much. I'm just like, just leave me be. Even in school, I was just one of the shyest people in school, but I hated that, because that feeling of not being a Brown, for me, that the same feeling of isolation was there in school, because I was like, I'm not one of the popular kids. I'm not like loud and the class clown. And I looked up to these kids in my teenage years, because I'm like, oh, where are they getting all this confidence from? Like, they're getting all the attention from teachers and from friends and from girls. Well, like, where is that for me? Like, but that's me comparing myself and thinking that's the epitome of what teenagers should be, when actually that's not the case. It's very stupid to think that. But then you start to unravel all of this stuff, and while you think that was decades ago, no, it's still part of who you are, unless you've acknowledged it and shone a light on it, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So
yeah,
the other thing I wanted to ask you is, you made that shift from the chiropractic world into selling the business and then going into coaching. Because I remember over text we spoke about it briefly, but I don't think we've had a real chance to talk about how that transition is going. And the reason I'm asking you is because I feel like I'm on the cusp of doing the same thing as you. I'm like,
that's good.
I guess the it's either
So I won't be too honest in my answers.
no, be brutally honest. No, be brutally honest. And it's basically because I feel like I'm at this point, or this junction now, where like my confidence in my own ability has skyrocketed, and then my fear of failure has also diminished. So it's like, this is working in my favor right now, this momentum. So I better ride the wave while I'm feeling. Actually, it'll probably continue to feel that way. I feel like it's been a breakthrough emotionally, because I was never this confident before. If you remember, at the beginning of this 6 months, I had a phone call with you about what the next 6 months might look like.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the things you said, which still stays with me to this day in that phone call, is before the first session. And my concern or my worries were around, oh, but what if I'm not wise enough and I can't answer their questions? And like, now I think back to them, like, that's so stupid. That's the stupidest thing ever. Like, so it's so it's interesting. I feel like I've grown as a person with your input, with Philip's input, with so many other people, great people that I'm blessed enough to be surrounded by at this particular stage. But you've obviously gone through this part of the journey slightly earlier on. So tell me all about it.
My experience, which I will do. Have you actually made the decision and you're just building up the courage to do it, or are you really unsure whether it's the right move for you?
No, I'm definitely sure. That's what I want to move into 100% moving forward. I am going to continue working with Philip, as he kindly invited me from September to continue in that group. So I guess I've declared it to myself, to my parents, to the universe. But what I don't feel is quite right is for me to just quit my day job immediately and just be like, all right, cool, I'm heading head first into this. I feel like that day is going to come and I'm ready for it. I'm just allowing the pieces of the puzzle to now show themselves. So I'm doing the bits that are currently in front of me, like setting up the website, being clear on exactly what I offer, what the price points are, all the kind of logistical stuff, the emotional, I guess, confidence in the things that I maybe would have feared before in terms of how the conversations would go and what people would think of me. I feel a lot of that's been addressed. It's now about, okay, get the logistics ready so people can actually start funneling through if they were interested and the time is right. You need to have a place that's available. So I'm at that point where I'm like, I'm going to start to build the foundations of that and kind of get the business logistical side going. And then I just trust that the universe will show me the sign when it's time to just be like, you need to just fucking jump. And I will do it. I will do it. But I need to feel my intuition is telling me that's the time. So I feel like it's happening in pieces.
Yeah, great.
And you've
great,
done it. You've done it. So tell me.
So yeah, I had, like you, I had made the absolute decision that I knew that's what I wanted to do. Like, I just was so certain that that was the right direction to go in. And I probably for 6 months before then, I was like, shouldn't I, but then I decided and I knew. And it probably took another 6 months before I was actually ready to put my business on the market. Like, it just took me some time to get ready. My experience, and this in part is because I was running the business, I knew that by selling it I would have a financial cushion. So so I think that in a way that makes a difference, that I knew I would have 18 months or so of money that I could live on before I actually had to start earning anything. So that was a nice backup. But equally, because I was running the business took up a lot of my time. And I think intellectually, I'd sort of had this idea of, well, the business kind of runs itself. I can just put a bit less attention into that whilst I'm building up my coaching, and then the coaching will be going enough and I can let go of the business. Sort of, that's what in a way, that would have been the lovely thing to do. But I know myself well enough to know that whilst I was still in chiropractic, I would not have built the coaching business. I just wouldn't have done it. I would have had the intention to do it. And then 2-3 years would have gone by and I would have just been like, yeah, I just haven't quite had the time to really put the focus in. So for me, it's very against my personality to just jump. I'm a planner and I'm sensible, and, but I knew if I don't jump, it won't happen. So I jumped in a way, well before I was ready, in terms of I didn't have I had a couple of clients, but I certainly didn't have a business. And I certainly hadn't figured out like who my ideal client was and exactly how I wanted to serve them. And equally, I don't think you really figure that out until you're doing it. You have an idea
Yeah,
of what you want
I think
to
so.
do.
Yeah, I don't have. Yeah.
Yeah, it's only through experience and doing it. So yeah, I jumped, and it's been a really strange time, because of course that jump happened right, a few months into the COVID situation. So the whole world is kind of upside down. And then suddenly my life is going from, I'm going into an office and running a team and I'm around people all day long, and to I'm at home on my own and I've got all this money in the bank. Am I going to build my business, or am I just going to be a bit scared? Do you know what I mean? So it, in a beautiful way, has really forced me to face up to a ton more demons and a ton more healing about, am I really good enough? Do I really have anything of value to say? Why will anyone listen to me? All of those bits that I've healed to some extent. And then a big life change like this, and it has, I don't think we should over exaggerate all of our life changes, but this one has been a big life change. So it's been a huge magnifier to the pieces that I've had left to heal. And I feel like in the last probably 6-8 months, something like that, I've also, just like you, and it's so palpable with you, it's so lovely to see it, I've really done more healing again. So there's been a real shift in me, and I'm feeling now like, oh, I'm so ready to do more and more of this. And all through that time, I've been running retreats, I've got one-on-one clients, I'm running online courses, I've been doing bits, but it's been slow, and it's been like, oh, I'm feeling inspired, I'll do a little bit, and then I'll have a few months when nothing's really happening, and then I'll do a little bit. And I feel at the moment, who knows what the future will hold, but like the momentum is really building, purely because I'm more and more confident and passionate about doing it.
Amazing. I think the more you engage in it, it just builds your confidence even more, because do you feel like it just reaffirms, this is what I'm supposed to be doing? This is why I do what I do after every conversation.
Yeah, I love it. I just love it. And I think I know why. With chiropractic, I had a few clients who were on a personal development journey themselves, and I loved adjusting them, and loved that just within a few, I didn't have big long chats with people, but I could just ask them 1 or 2 questions during a session, and they'd come back and be like, oh, I've been thinking about that, and I've done this, and I've done this. That energized me. Whereas so much of the rest of it, being around people's energy who weren't trying to grow themselves, I just found so draining. Whereas with personal development, all day long, you're with people who want to change. And I just find that so uplifting.
Yeah, same. That's what I'm excited about, is to be surrounded by people who are just hungry to shift, regardless of where they are in their journey. And I feel like where I've come to the point in my journey now is having had these conversations on an informal basis, where the byproduct of the chat is me coaching them or them shifting because they're like, oh, that's like, I never thought of it that way, or whatever it is. And it's happened multiple times. But I just feel like recently, it's just, as I've had those conversations, I just, the thought occurred to me, like, this is ridiculous. What am I doing? Why am I not serving people on a wide scale basis? Like, I need to start taking this shit seriously because I have something to offer and I'm not giving it. What's going on? And that's where I'm like, that's when I kind of declared to this literally a few weeks ago I'm talking about, and I just declared to myself, you know what, I'm just ready to go all in on this. I believe in the ability that I have, gift that I have to offer. This is the healing tool that I'm here to really sharpen and to offer people. And like you, I just feed off that energy when someone is on a similar journey, and looking for alignment to their soul purpose or their inner being or whatever it might be. um and it's regardless of where you are in the back in the world. Like, everyone is really just a soul in a human form, and they're living so many different lives, so you get to interact. You have the privilege of learning from so many different people at the same time, different traditions, different stories, experiences, background. So it's fun. I'm just looking forward to it. And I am excited to kind of see where it goes for you as well, because after these few months, it sounds like the momentum, as it's kind of growing within you, it's now starting to show on the outside as well, right? And you've got the retreat coming up at the end of the year that I've seen that you've been.
Yes, yeah, I've got a couple of retreats coming up actually, which is exciting. Yeah, I run one with my girlfriend Melissa, who of course you met doing One Last Talk, and I've got one that I'm running on my own, but actually that's only for existing clients. So, but yeah, it's exciting.
How do you feel about that, doing are they both in person?
They'll be in person. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love doing them. I just for me, I enjoy the one-to-one and the Zoom. I think it's hugely valuable, but it lights up my soul to do the in-person retreats. I just, yeah, I
Yeah.
partly because I love being with people in person, and I love being able to nurture them and, cook beautiful food and get out in nature and, do all of those bits I really love to do. But I also think that people's ability to make shifts in themselves when they're out of their normal environment, I feel just the possibilities are all so much greater. Everything is heightened when you're out of your normal environment. So I think I get just so excited for what's possible for people in the space of a retreat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely felt that in Ireland for sure.
Mm.
Being away from your regular environment, that in itself begins to create a shift and a space for you to do something new, have new breakthroughs and perspectives. And it did the same with my parents. I was like, well, we're just going to end up going around in circles, having the same old kind of battle if I do it at home, which is where the patterns live. They live at home. If you come out of there, go to the pub, sit outside, nice sunny day, it's going to be a different energy around different people, different environment. Automatically, the behavior begins to shift on a subtle level. And I saw it, 4 or 5 hours into the conversation. I was like, we have not had one bit of friction, even though if this was at home, probably would have happened. So
Yeah.
I haven't got as far as you in my journey in terms of planning an in-person retreat, but I definitely see it happening, like in nature somewhere abroad. For my own selfish reasons, I want to be in the sun. I love being around people. I want to spend time with people. I want to help them heal. I want to see those breakthroughs. So basically, it's a selfish reason because it lights me up. Like you said, it lights up my soul. So it's like I want to bring
Yeah,
you guys
but
along.
I think that's the beautiful thing. Like, it's the win-win situation
Yeah.
when you are lit up. That's how you have the biggest impact and
Yep.
help other people, isn't it? So yes, it's selfish, but it's also selfless. I think
Yeah.
it's both of those things.
Yeah. No, 100%. I definitely agree there. Do you find over the last kind of I know we talked about this briefly at the beginning, but the last 6 months are kind of reflecting on yourself in terms of this new um I guess position you've formally stepped into as a coach and stuff, the work that we've done. Have you found any like kind of subtle shifts or reflections or things that you've been thinking about that you may not have thought about before? um
I think one of the biggest personal shifts that I've made by going through that course is lessening my expectations on my clients. I think I, not I think, I definitely used to go into conversations with enormous pressure on myself to, like, you better be really good and say something really profound and really wise, and it's down to you to help them transform. And I was aware that I was doing that and that it wasn't a particularly healthy space to be in, but I only had the awareness that that was impacting me. I hadn't realized until it came out during the space of that course, how my energy is going to impact my client's ability to shift and change and transform. I think in the same way we were speaking a moment ago about you going into a conversation with your parents, like wanting to force the outcome some way. Like, when you hear someone else, when I heard you speak about that, I'm like, oh, it's so obvious. Whereas when I'm doing it, I'm like, no, this is only impacting me. It's not impacting anyone else. So that it sounds little, and yet that shift and that awareness has changed so much.
it's huge because it's just that you change the feeling of the space that you're creating, because you
Yeah.
have no idea probably how people felt with the previous energy that you started the conversation with. They may already started to feel hesitant or defensive, whatever, on a subconscious level, and now you're coming in a lot more grounded, relaxed. It almost feels like you're laid back with confidence because you're like, this is what I'm meant to do. I'm not going to expect anything out of this. I know it's going to go in the direction it needs to go. um,
Yeah.
and that kind of takes the pressure off you as well. So
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
you
And
can
it,
just
as
you can
we were
just be
talking
you.
about right at the start, it allows the fun to come in as well. Like, rather than that, I've got to do, like, rigid, serious. It's and that doesn't mean that I'm taking it any less seriously in a way, but it just, yeah, changes
It's
the
more of
energy.
you rather than
Yeah.
you wearing this hat of like, I am a consultant, I'm going to get you results and then you're going to do a good testimony. Like, it's like, forget all that. It's just the
Yeah.
shift happens when you're actually comfortable being you. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. How about for you? What have some of your learnings been?
Interesting. I've actually got the journal right here. So the one that we got from Brave Soul, I basically continued to journal each of the sessions in there. I just felt like it was the right space. But there's so much that came up, valuable stuff from the questions you asked and many others asked, and the insights and feedback and breakout sessions. Just between all of that stuff, there was so much content, all really good. But I don't feel I've had the time to really digest and reflect it. To just sit down and go through it, really. I feel like it's been more of a subtle shift of inner confidence for me, from I know this is kind of what I'm supposed to do, but I still need other people. I still was clinging on to the fact that I need other people to call me wise, or I need them to feel like they're having a massive breakthrough. So I feel good enough that, yeah, I am clever. Look, I can do this job. It's not about that though. Like, the confidence has now come from, this is an ability that I was born with. This is one of my strengths. I'm not a scientist. I'm not good at math. I am not blah, 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 X, Y, and Z. All of those roles aren't meant for me. That's why I wasn't good at studying them in school. I never enjoyed them. This is one thing, though, that keeps lining up personally and professionally in every conversation I have. It just seems to flow. There's something here. And then I think going through the last 6 months, by the end of it, it kind of became apparent that this is a no-brainer. It's just something I'm made to do. I just need to own it. And I don't think that was the bit I hadn't done. I hadn't owned it because I was scared that with the story that was happening, I can't answer a question, then I look stupid, I'm not going to get referrals, and the business kind of breaks itself down before it's even begun. My reputation's ruined. This like crazy like downward spiral, like I haven't even done anything yet. It's like this downward spiral of like thoughts that everyone's going to think I'm a big failure, but it's like, well, actually that's not the case, because let's look at all the conversations I've had up to now. They've all gone really positive. So this is a story that's playing up, maybe that's come from wherever it's come from. Doesn't really matter, because I'm not owning that as a story anymore. So I feel like that's the shift. It's like a subconscious shift that's began to happen.
I love it. And I just want to comment there, because it's so interesting the way you started that. You're like, well, I haven't really like digested it and haven't really done it. But basically, I've grown so much in confidence that I've made this major life change.
Basically, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I downplay a lot of stuff. And I use, I don't know where it comes from, but it's just the habit of using words like it's just this or it's only that. But that's part of it. You're just not valuing the amount that I'm able to offer to people and who I am as a person. It's something I'm beginning to really realize, that even the smallest of things that I share and the way I show up, the energy that I have, is testament to all the work that I've done and the effort I've put in to get this far in my journey. And I should own that. I should be proud of it. And it was only until recently, again, this came up in my conversation with my parents, where I said, I'm actually proud of who I've become. And it took a long time to say that in a very confident and meaningful way. Before, it would have just been like a thought that I had, like, yeah, I guess I've done a few good things in my life here and there, didn't fail law school, great, managed to get through my GCSEs. But no, it's much more than that in terms of the character that I've actually become. And I just feel really confident in the journey I've gone on, and then who I've become today, knowing, yes, there's a lot more to do, but I'm happy with where I am. I'm content, at peace, a lot more than where I was before, 6 months ago, a year ago, 5 years ago. And yeah, so now it's funny that I started this conversation, this part of the conversation saying, well, yeah, I haven't really read over the notes, but as I'm talking, this is where the gold is, right? As you talk, it starts to come up naturally as you unravel these thoughts that have been buried inside. But yeah, it's been nice just having conversations with people like you. And I feel like moving into the next chapter, I want to be surrounded with more people like this. And I have less tolerance for others who are maybe on a different journey right now. And it's not to say I'm better than them. It's just we're on two different journeys. And to feed the fuel of my momentum in this direction, I want to have more of these conversations. So it naturally means spending more time with people like you. I don't know if you've felt that, but I definitely feel it at the moment.
So I would love to ask you some questions, actually. So just to speak to that briefly, and then yes, I have some questions as well on a similar topic.
Oh, here we go. Go on.
So definitely, I had a time in my life, it was quite a long time ago now, where I'd sort of outgrown sounds, again, really judgmental. I don't mean I'm better than them, just on a different path to a lot of my school friends. And yet I hadn't really found my tribe of people who were doing this work and excited about the same stuff that I was. And I definitely had a patch of time where I felt really quite sort of isolated and lonely. And as I started delving deeper in the work and getting more confident, just almost overnight, this beautiful friendship group just arrived of people who were that they're mostly chiropractors or in the chiropractic profession, but deeply into personal development work. And the joy that brings me of having this close-knit group of people where we're in, really regular contact, and we're just, I was about to say on the same page. I don't even mean that, because we're all at different stages and have different strengths. We're all very different in some ways, but we're all growing and moving and excited about the same kind of stuff. So I think that's a beautiful thing for you to be aware of, that you think, I want to be having more of these conversations and be around more people
To
like
be
this.
build a community, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so uplifting and strengthening, I think, because as much as at the moment you've got that beautiful energy of like, I just feel so good and confident, whilst of course that will remain at the core of who you are, I can equally promise you, as you well know, that you will have days or weeks or months where you don't feel like that. And having this beautiful community around you, I think is so important. And then what I would love to ask you, so I had mentioned on one of our calls this idea of, I've been thinking about starting a podcast and I'm not really sure. And then just a few days ago, I went back through the process. I don't know if you've done it, of the DeMartini's values. Have you ever gone through that process?
I've heard of it, but I haven't gone through it myself. No.
It's I do it sort of every few years just to see if I'm still in the same place. And it's a process. It's not looking at your values in terms of I value kindness and I value growth. It's like, what do you spend your time on? What do you spend your money on? What do you surround yourself in your environment? Like, it's really, what's the truth of your values, because you're always going to find time for what's most important to you and money for what's most important to you.
Very
so
true.
you know, a businessman might say, I value my family, and yet he's at work 90% of the time. You know, it's just not true. So I thought, gosh, since I've sold the business, I haven't been through my values process. I should just recheck in on that. And one of the biggest things that came up for me in that, which wasn't a surprise, was that one of my highest values is having real, honest, good conversations with people. And that's why I love this friendship group, and I love being in the coaching group with you. And that's why I wanted to shift out of chiropractic into coaching. It's these conversations. And I think that's really why I'm interested in maybe starting a podcast as well. It's because I feel like there's the potential to have real conversations and also to expand my network of the people that I'm speaking to. And I'm wondering, and maybe this is a terrible environment to ask you this question, but I'm wondering what your experience has been of that, because I know that some podcasts are even they're long form and they're beautiful to listen to, but it's very much people going through the motions of telling the stories they've told 1,000 times, and it's not that connecting. But I do feel that you show up so beautifully and authentically. And I'm wondering, can you really enjoy those conversations and build community? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think I do. So first of all, thank you for your kind words. I appreciate you seeing that in me, and it just gives me even more confidence to believe in myself as I move forward. So I appreciate that. The conversations are a reflection of me, and the guests that I choose are a reflection of me. So you go back to episode 1 and you look at the first 100, you'll naturally see a pattern in terms of what was important to me. What was important to me is going to be a reflection of the type of person I choose to have on here and the type of conversation I choose to have. So if you were to ever go back and listen, you'd see, oh, that's what was important to him. Hence why he's asking that question, or he's focusing on that topic, or he's showing up in that way. It's very much the library of episodes starting from, I think, towards the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, I think. So much growth happened in that time. From it was more so moving away from the typical personal development, setting goals and ambitions and making $1 million and financial freedom and thinking positive. I did all of that stuff, and there's definitely value to that because it built the foundation. But then I just felt my character was being developed more on a emotional depth kind of scale as the months and the years went by. So it's interesting to see the types of conversations and the people that I was choosing to involve myself with. And I just think this platform definitely gives you the opportunity to have those deeper conversations, but it all comes back to you as a individual. So if you don't show up with that energy and you don't have that space and that intention, it won't happen the way that you intend for it to happen, and the deep conversations won't happen because you don't have the capacity to have them or to open that space for it. So before, my questions may have been more business oriented or money oriented, or talking about like fun experiences that that person's had, knowing the type of life they may have lived. And so that's what was interesting to me at the time. That's really what was kind of lighting me up. So I wanted to talk about that. And some of it was ego driven because I was like, that person's really famous, so that would really be good to have their name on my podcast. So a lot of it was driven by that because I was insecure and I wanted to just have my name known. I wanted to be successful, blah, blah, blah. So it all played a part in who I was then. But now it's very much about the quality of the conversation, and the quality of the conversation again is a reflection of what's important to me. And what's important to me is understanding the depth of that person's character, and that can show up in a multitude of ways: their story, their intentions, their relationships, their business, money, blah 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 blah. But it's almost this energetic thing, energetic portal that opens up. I'm just going to say that that's what it is. It's an energetic portal, and it's down to me to create that space so that person feels safe enough to share. So I know we talk about this in a coaching capacity, but it's the same thing here, because that person may not be comfortable being on camera or sharing, or they might be, but they might be used to sharing a particular story because they're on the news or they're on the front page of Entrepreneur magazine or that and that and that. And everyone's asking, how do you make $1 million? And tell me the 5 things that people should think about. If you wish you were 20 years old again, what would you do? That's all bullshit. I don't care about that stuff, because that's not the crux of what's important. If you find the person is in alignment with themselves, they'll figure out what they need to do in their lives. The decision making is easy. You just need to be confident enough to make it from the right place. In a long-winded way, I hope that answers your question. And you may have other questions that come up as a result, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's just what I needed to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. And there's no right and wrong way to do this. It's a reflection of who you are. So if you want to do 20 minutes, do 20 minutes. If you want to do 2 hours, do 2 hours. It all just comes down to you as a person and how you show up to the conversation, what your intention is. So I usually go in unscripted like this one, just with everyone, because I just feel that that's how I can naturally get into the flow of it. Otherwise, if I have stuff, I'm like, oh, did I miss that question? What's next? And I'm not really listening then. It just takes away from the listening, because I'm like eyeballing my notes every now and then. I've got my phone open and my notes. So it's just, that didn't work for me, but I guess you find your own way once you kind of get into the groove. So yeah. And I think if you have the desire to do the podcast, that idea has been dropped into your consciousness for a reason. That's just how I see it now. And you're definitely someone who's in alignment with themselves. You're doing a lot of work. You've come this far in your journey. So if you have any ideas that drop into your awareness, it's coming from a place of good intention, truth, and clarity. It's not an ego driven or a insecure driven decision. So do it.
Okay.
You made a big decision to me anyway. I'm telling you, it's a big decision from going from chiropractic, sell my business. I'm going to change my career path and start helping people. I'm like, well, that's huge. If you can do that, you can set this up.
Yeah. I think it's my question, which you've answered really beautifully, is before you've done something, you have an idea of what it might be, but of course the reality might be very different. And my intention could be to have these great conversations with people, but maybe the reality is no one's that authentic when they're being filmed, or do you know what I mean? It might just not really hit the mark. And so I don't want to spend a ton of time and energy going in a direction that actually isn't really that fulfilling. But you've given me great, it feels like it could be just the right thing to put some time and energy into.
Definitely do it. So I feel like there's probably so much more we could speak about, but I think we've gone on for like an hour and a half. Yeah, about an hour and a half. Yeah.
Good.
But yeah, I think it'll be a good time to probably hit pause. If you're up for it, we should definitely do a part 2 somewhere along the line down the future. to see how we've
Let,
both progressed.
let's once you've started your coaching business and I've
Yeah.
got my podcast going.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. But honestly, I appreciate you making the time. I'm so glad that we made the decision to make this happen. Again, imagine this conversation probably would have happened over the phone, but we've spoken about so much that I felt it would be of service to others if we could just record it and share it, whatever they may pick up. So yeah, I'm grateful for your time and energy.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to chat to you as always.